This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 45. This episode is sponsored by Nicole Burgess, the introvert empowerment mentor for the high-achieving and sensitive professional women. She helps them end the overwhelmed and stressed out cycle so they can thrive in their life, create balance that works specifically for them, and continue to make an impact in our world. Just a reminder, I have a new online course for psychotherapists, mental health workers, and healers called The Practical Profit for Psychotherapists. It's for those who are sole proprietors or LLCs wanting to gain confidence in knowing their financial numbers versus staying stuck in the avoiding or feeling ashamed about not understanding their finances because, you just don't learn these things in grad school. For a limited time, if you use the coupon code DISCOUNT99, you only pay $99. And let me tell you that at this price, this class is going fast. To find out more, go out to practicalprofit.com. Well, welcome, sisters. In today's episode, I'm going to talk all about the emotional quotient, which sometimes is referred to as emotional intelligence. I'm going to talk about what EQ is, the history of it, how it's a little different than IQ, which it is, and how it actually impacts your life. Let me start a little bit with the history. So according to Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, they talked about really kind of these founding fathers as being Peter Salovey and John Mayer. And they really created this formal theory around what they called back then emotional intelligence back in about 1990. And they described EQ as, quote, the ability to recognize, understand, utilize, and regulate emotions effectively in everyday life. Then Daniel Goleman came along, and he wrote the book Emotional Intelligence back in 1995. And what happened was that just exploded and put it into the mainstream, which is really helpful because one of the things is as people started to understand emotional intelligence or EQ, they also started to recognize the importance of teaching our children these skills. Why is EQ, or what is it, and why does it impact us so much, or how does it impact? So your emotional intelligence impacts every relationship that you're in, whether it's your home life or your work life. It also impacts how you relate to one another and the quality of your own mental health. It's also one of the vital factors in your own success. So according to Daniel Goleman in his book, he said there were 5 components to EQ, or emotional intelligence. One is self-awareness, and that is the foundational building blocks, right? And I talked about this in episode 1 when I talked about self-awareness and contemplation. If you don't know who you truly are from the inside out, if you do more reacting versus responding, I would encourage you go back to episode 1 and listen to that. Having your own self-awareness, knowing your own values, knowing what your belief systems are, is vital for your EQ. If you are living under, these personas or the mask, like we talked about, or I've talked about the good girl mask, if you're living under the shoulds, if fear is driving everything in your life, then it's being able to have that awareness so you can begin to shift those things and step more into who you truly are. The second component that he talks about is self-regulation. And this means, how you express your emotions, you regulate your emotions, and then just how you manage your own emotions. If you've noticed in many of my podcast episodes, I often ask guests, what are some of their self-care techniques that they use? This is part of self-regulating. When you give yourself permission to take time out, to rejuvenate, to come back to yourself, to get that sleep that impacts every aspect of our life, that all impacts your own regulation of your emotions. The third component is motivation. So those who have high EQs are intrinsically motivated, meaning they are internally motivated in their life, their own personal guiding force, right? Your own internal compass. You use that, which is very different than being extrinsically motivated, meaning externally motivated. If you're motivated by wealth, recognition, or fame, or getting other outside rewards, your EQ is lower because it's very outside coming in. We call that external locus of control versus internal locus of control in the psychotherapy world. And you're wanting to have more of that from the internal. Number 4 component is empathy. Now, I know for many of you who are listening, you are empathic, and many HSPs and introverted folks that I work with, they truly have this gift, and everybody has this ability to be an empath. And so what that means is understanding how another person feels, or it's as if you are in their shoes and you can really understand where they're coming from. It doesn't mean you agree with them, but it means you understand where they're coming from. And this is a skill, again, that is really important for adults to teach children and how to have empathy for another person. The 5th component is social skills. And what this means is your ability to interact with others, be able to successfully navigate social situations, to be able to manage conflicts. And I know for many women I talk with, they're like, oh, but I just want to avoid conflicts. I don't want to have to deal with those. Well, to have a higher EQ, it's being able to learn these skills so that you feel more confident in yourself. It also goes along with being able to really lead, not only your own life, but to be a leader of other people as well, where you can really influence people. And I know for many HSPs, right, this is one of our gifts too, that we are so much about collaboration and cooperation. And this is like the building blocks for how you really do relationships and social skills as well. So one thing to remember, if you've got a lot of anxiety, right, or a lot of fears that are impacting your life, it's going to interfere with your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence. And when you start to learn how to manage your emotions or even get to know what your emotions are, which will help through self-reflection, journaling, that getting to know yourself will help raise your own EQ, then anxiety doesn't impact you nearly as much. It can't, because you know how to work through it. And that's one of the things I definitely work with my coaching clients on, is learning how to know that it is possible to change those thoughts. It's so possible to rewrite your inner story without staying attached to it. Now, the other thing is that Salovey and Mayert also talked about the 4 dimensions, and I was just kind of alluding to that just a second ago. And their 4 dimensions they talked about is 1, perceiving emotion. Again, many HSPs do this really well because they're very in tune with other people. So perceiving emotion is about being able to acknowledge what's going on in that other person. Like you can read their emotions of what's going on, being able to be aware of and you recognize the states that they're in and to do it accurately. The number 2 thing is using emotions to really facilitate thoughts. This means, being able to make better judgments about things, make better decisions about things, knowing if your mood shifts or changes. Again, you are very aware of what's going on internally so that you can be like, okay, yes, it's, I'm in sync with my values, but also my emotions. And when I want to make these decisions or, being able to problem solve something that's going on in my life and being able to really hear other points of view too. That's part of this. Number 3 is understanding emotions. This again means being able to understand various emotions. And I know often what I hear from people is, there's positive and negative emotions or good and bad emotions, and that is not true. Emotions are just that, emotions. So happy is not better than sad, is not better than angry, is not better than elated, is not better than frustrated. Those are nothing more than emotions. So when you know your own emotions, when you're able to perceive and you start to understand the different emotions, how they work with one another, how they impact decisions, how they impact other people, you are able to really detach from some of those and just understand that emotions can come and go fairly quickly and easily. Which brings you to the final dimension that they talk about is managing emotions. This is really being open to what's pleasant and unpleasant, right? Most people are like, I just want to be happy more often than not. They want to avoid pain, sadness, anger. And they're not good or bad. You just acknowledge that this is what I'm feeling in this moment. It's okay because you know it's going to pass. So let me give you an example of these 4 dimensions. When you know yourself really well, you are able to understand your emotions. You know that they can change at various different times, also depending on the thoughts that are kind of running through your head. And you can articulate them because you're managing them. You're responding to them, not reacting to them. Use assertive communication. Many of you probably are aware of this, but assertive communication, many of you are probably aware of this, but assertive communication is the I statements. I feel frustrated when you don't give me a phone call or a text message and you're going to be late for dinner. And what I need from you is a heads up so I can start the dinner at a later time or keep it in the oven. Or if I were, if let's say you were meeting one another at the movie theaters so that I know to go ahead and I can get the ticket or wait for you. But just giving me a heads up that you're going to be late would be respectful. That is being able to perceive your own emotion, which was frustration, to be able to navigate that. It's like, okay, what is it that I'm really needing or wanting in this moment? Understanding that that's just a state, right? And that you know that it impacts the relationship you are in with this other person. And then you managed it because you said it assertively to this other person and you did it in a calm way. If you're yelling and screaming at that other person, that's not you managing it, that's you reacting to it. The other beautiful thing about having a higher EQ or EI, it means you are really able to improve your communication skills. So if we go back to component number 1, that's self-awareness, and then number 2, which is self-regulation, when you're doing your self-reflection, when you're journaling or you're sharing your thoughts with somebody because you're processing through something, you're raising your own communication skills because you are more in control of you. You're beginning to recognize your thoughts, you're beginning to recognize your own feelings, and then you can go back to the person, whether it's a pleasant or unpleasant interaction you had with them, and share how that impacted you. It also helps you become more resilient in life. You learn how to really flourish in your own life, which then can really impact your performance at work or your own business that you're in. Because you are more balanced in your own life. You know that this emotion is going to come and go and that you are able to handle it. You're able to manage it. You don't get necessarily, what I like to say is like stuck in the pit of that emotion. You feel it and you move forward. You give yourself permission to process it, acknowledge it, if you need to, articulate it, and you move on. When it's lower EQ, it means oftentimes what I see is where women sometimes they really get stuck and they're still talking about something that happened 30 years ago. It's like, bring it forward, remember the event, forgive them. Doesn't mean you forget, but to forgive so that you're no longer drinking that poison. You're no longer staying stuck and keeping your energy in the past. Because if you're telling me you want to move forward in your life, then you got to stop living in the past because our future isn't written yet. But if we keep having those same thoughts, which often we do, it's like a little lovely ticker tape parade that we just use the same thoughts over and over and over every single day. And we bring them forward like somehow our future is going to be different if we're not aware of that. When you raise your own EQ, you are able to really shift that. Another way to improve your EQ is through mindfulness. And I think most of you are aware I talk quite a bit about mindfulness and self-compassion because, again, it all goes back to contemplation, self-awareness, self-care techniques. All of that is helping you stay very present in the moment. Again, if you're stuck in the past, it's typically about more like depression. If you're stuck way far in the future, it's typically anxiety that's running your life. So each time you're bringing yourself back to this moment, honoring whatever emotion is coming up, then being able to articulate that with whoever you're having an interaction with, and maybe that's just yourself, and that part of you is telling you a story that is no longer true, then you can move forward and go on. Another question to ask yourself is, how do you actually handle stress? Now, if you have not been taking time out for yourself, if you've not gotten good sleep, or if you're not eating when you're really hungry, which is the hangry that most people will talk about, and myself, when I get really hungry, I can get very angry, which is the hangry piece of it. So if you're not doing that self-management, that self-care, you're not going to be able to tolerate stress levels very much or conflicts very well. So this is really important, just to make sure you're getting plenty of rest, making sure you are inserting some sort of self-care every single day into your life so that you can keep that stress level down. Because we all know when your stress level stays up, it impacts your cortisol levels, which impacts your internal organs, your heart, blood pressure, all of that. And for HSPs, we know that we need to take multiple breaks throughout the day, and that can be as simple as closing your eyes so that you don't have all that external stimulation coming in, and taking a few deep breaths, getting yourself back into your body, which is also called being grounded, like feeling your feet on the floor, feeling, if you've got your hand over your heart, just listen and feel your heart beating. That can all help bring you back to the moment. Question yourself or explore, get curious, right? About where do I seek validation from? Do I seek it from myself? Do I do a lot of comparison? Do I think I need to be doing X, Y, and Z when the reality is just keep focusing on where I'm going? And when you do that, again, you raise your EQ level up because you're focusing on your path versus that extrinsic reward or needing that external validation to say that you are enough. Because you already are enough. You are already whole and complete. And I know some of you listening to that just probably went, whatever, Nicole, or maybe you even just called me a name. I don't know. That would be a reaction versus a response. But it's part of being able just to understand that you don't need validation to know that you're enough. Because the reality is you already are. And getting to know yourself more, raising your own emotional quotient, your own emotional intelligence, is just so vital for your overall well-being. If we don't even paying attention to, your business, your work life, or your relationships, it's that relationship with self. Knowing that you have the ability to shift this and change this and create your own joy and inner happiness. Another person who I think did this really well before this EQ really kind of came into fruition was Fred Rogers. I recently watched his documentary about, his life and his show, the Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor show. And I think he did this incredibly well with teaching parents and children about understanding their emotions, acknowledging their emotions, and doing it in a way that you manage them, and about cooperation and collaboration. He often, would ask, well, what do you do when you feel so mad? And that gave you permission to feel whatever you felt. So if you've not seen his documentary, I would encourage you, go out and watch that. And you can get even more understanding of what EQ is and how he was doing that well before the book came out from Daniel Goleman. So if you find yourself after you've listened to this today, like, wait a minute, I don't even know how to tune into somebody else. I don't even understand how to, go with the flow of things, or I just really struggle with coping with sadness. Give yourself permission to start today. Take an action step where set aside about 15 minutes sometime today and do some journaling. Allow yourself just to really process what you've heard today. What came up for you? What emotions did you feel? Again, starting with your own inner awareness, your own inner self-compassion can help you then tune a little more into those around you. If you're unsure of what the other person is feeling and they're talking to you, and reflect back, just like, well, it sounds like you're having a really hard time today. Is that correct? Or am I understanding this right? That will validate or really like acknowledge what you're thinking the other person is feeling. And if you don't hit it, meaning if you don't get their emotion correct, they'll let you know. I mean, that happens all the time. If I'm off, if I'm like, it sounds like you're really sad, and the person's like, no, I'm not sad. I'm disappointed. There's the self-correction, and that's all good. But it's acknowledging how you feel and processing it so you can truly move forward. So I want to kind of take another sidestep here and talk a little bit about, the intelligence quotient or the IQ piece of it. That is really more about your like academic performance and things, which is very, very different than your emotional EQ or the emotional quotient piece of it. Where your IQ is, you're actually born with it and it doesn't change too much over time, whereas EQ you can. So if you really want to have more collaborative relationships, if that's something that you struggle with, again, start with yourself. Either get counseling or coaching to help with that if you manage a team or if you know you're going to be put into a team. Being able to reach out and get the support that you need so that you can change that skill level. This also, as I said earlier, having a higher EQ impacts your decision-making ability. So making sure that you can truly manage anxiety and stressors is vital for you as well, so that you don't get stuck, what I sometimes call is like being on the fence about something. Make a decision and go forward. And oftentimes I hear women, it's like, well, I don't want to make the wrong decision, so they just don't make a decision, which is a decision. And I get sometimes we need to weigh the financial piece of it. We need to weigh how it's going to impact other people in our life. And sometimes we just really need to take those calculated risks. And you don't know how it's going to turn out, but that's where your high EQ helps you out. Because you know how to tolerate the unknown. You embrace it. Then change happens every single day. No day is the same. Every day is different. And the more you can embrace the unknown than letting things unfold, you raise your EQ. If you also think about it, having a high EQ, it really impacts those personal relationships that you're in too. Often they're more satisfying, they're more high quality, they're more stable, and you just enjoy one another's company. Again, it does not mean you have to agree with one another all the time, but you really understand like, hey, I'm in charge of me. That person is responsible for themselves. And you can have these incredible conversations because you both have really high EQ. So I'm going to give you a little bit of encouragement today. Pay attention to how you handle stressors today. Do you react or do you respond? Do you stay calm, cool, and collected? Or do you kind of melt down and go all over? It's not good or bad, just observe it. Now you know that it's like, okay, as I observe what happened with me today, what could I do differently going forward? Did I need to take a step back? Was I hungry? Did I not get enough sleep? Then the next thing is taking responsibility for that. So if something didn't go well between you and another person, then if you need to, go back and apologize. If not, just say, wow, that was a really rough day, or this was really challenging for me today, and here's why. That way, again, you're acknowledging yourself where you are and that it's okay. Begin to, again, observe and think about how your actions may impact other people. Does not mean you're responsible for the other person, but if you've not typically put yourself in another person's shoes, begin to do that. All of this is learnable, teachable. So if you're really struggling with your emotional intelligence, if you want to do that better and not have anxieties or fears or doubts or the comparison-itis run you, then feel free to, jump over to my website, NicoleBurgessCoaching.com, and set up a discovery call. So I hope you have found this helpful. Having a high EQ impacts every area of your life and ultimately your own well-being. Take care. Thank you for listening. And if you are a psychotherapist wanting to feel more confident in fee setting, raising your fees, and having a better understanding of basic accounting for your business, then go out to practicalprofitforpsychotherapists.com and look at the new online course I've created. Until then, take care.